Hello, this is Andrew with Mamillion.bike, and this is a Lynskey GR300 internally routed frame set. Some of you may be wondering why or how I ended up with this. Actually, it's your fault. I was originally looking to replace my Revolt with a metal framed bike, and when I wasn't sure what was going to happen there, I looked and I found Lynskey, and I saw they were, a reasonably good value. And then, things worked out with the Revolt. But shortly thereafter, some of the folks who watch the channel contacted me about my thoughts on buying a titanium frame. And long story short, I got involved in a group buy with them, and I ended up with this. That was September 5th. This frame was supposed to get here on October 15th. And today is the 18th of November, so things were a little bit behind schedule. I imagine at least part of that was due to the COVID situation. But we're going to walk through the frame real quick, and we're going to kind of highlight and showcase some of the neat things that this frame has. You can get a custom frame from a company like Moots. I don't know if Lynskey does custom frames. This is not custom frames. This is just standard frames that I ordered from them. It has a lot of really neat features. This is the internally routed frame, and if you want to, you can get this frame set up for Di2. I did not opt to do that. Basically, it entails drilling some holes in the frame. I asked Lynskey for some photos, and I'm just going to plaster them around here so you can see kind of what that looks like if you were to get it drilled. If you decide to go, as I did, for the mechanical shifting frame, and you decide later that you want Di2, you can either drill the holes yourself or you can go to a shop to have that done. So just to demonstrate what the internal routing is basically there's a tube that runs from here to there. I'm going to shove the shift cable here down it, and you can see how that works. And then there's also holes that are underneath here and come out there for the shift cable, and then a hole here that comes out here for the hydraulic brake lines. There is a small hole underneath the bottom bracket, and the bottom bracket is a standard BSA threaded style. And there's also some holes here with the tubes where they've bored them out. There's a hole through here too. When you order the frame, you do get a fork, and it comes with, you can opt for a couple different kinds of headsets. Oddly enough, they did not ship headset spacers with the frame set, so I'm going to have to source those myself. That is really strange because I've worked with quite a few frame sets before, and I've never had one that didn't come with spacers. You will have to cut the fork no matter what, because there's a lot of space, unless you really crank up the spacers on there. So you do be prepared for that, but that's pretty standard with a frame set. The Thru-Axles that come with it are these Lynskey, and they're interesting. I've never seen anything like this. They're kind of they have this quick release kind of thing going on. So standard 12 millimeter, 100, 12 millimeter, 142, but they obviously need some grease there. And you kind of spin it in and then actuate that to actually compress and tighten up the Thru-Axle. I don't know if I'm going to keep these or not. I'm going to have to see how I like them in practice. Flat mount brakes. You do have fender mounts up here and internally routed hydraulics. Actually, I forgot to mention that with the Cancrete bearings and headset, you also get their stirrer tube plug, which is not the kind that you probably want to use, because once you put it in there, getting it out would be a real bear. The Lynskey includes this FSA plug, which is much more standard, so you can stick it in there, tighten it up, and get a much more user-friendly application. I opted for the titanium seat post with 0 setback. They also have, I think it's either 20 or 25 setback. One of the things I'm going to play with here is seeing if I like the titanium seat post. I have a carbon seat post just laying around, so I'm going to see how that works out. There's a couple of really neat features back over here, but I'm going to move the camera so we can discuss those. So the Thru-Axle back here has the same kind of quick release-ish kind of mechanism as the one in the front. The flat mount brake mount is a separate piece from the frame itself. I would imagine that the main benefit for that is they can make sure this is really level and machine it separately. But also, should you damage this, it is possible to replace it. So the derailleur is also a separate piece, which is to be expected, but it is a massive piece of aluminum and actually contains the nut that the through-axle screws into to compress it. So again, if you were to damage this, it would be replaceable. Fender mounts here, fender mounts over here on the other side, and a fender mount here, fender mount here, and rack mounts here. And of course these fender mounts could be used for racks as well because they are pretty massive. They're very well built. Just to zoom in on these welds here, you can see that they're all just really, really nice. I did go through over the whole bike. I'm not gonna go through that with you, but I went through the whole bike and just kind of, rubbed my hand over all the welds looking for imperfections, and they're all just really, really nice. So as I mentioned, I opted for the zero setback titanium seat post. It does have a tiny little hole in here. I'm not really sure what that's for. The clamping mechanism fits in here like so, and then it comes with these parts here. I'm not really sure what to call these, but they fit in underneath. These are for carbon rail saddles. These are for not carbon rail saddles. I'm going to use a carbon rail saddle, so I took the ones that came with it out, and we're going to use these. Mounting a saddle in here is a little bit tricky, I guess. I've never worked with a bike clamp or saddle clamp that works like this. So I'm going to just briefly show you how I got this to work. So you have to take the whole thing apart, and then you have this top part, and you just kind of have to get the saddle up, this part of the saddle up underneath it, and just kind of wiggle it up like that. And then once you've got it in place, insert the bottom clamp, and then once you have that in place, then it should just kind of stay. And then you can take the, whatever these things are called, and insert them up underneath it and start to tighten that up. So once you know how to do that, it's not terribly difficult, but it's very different from any other saddle clamp that I've played with before. Now, I'm not sure what you all think about using a white saddle on a gravel bike. I think it's going to look awesome. I do have some concerns that it's going to get dirty, and it'll be difficult to keep clean, but I'm 100% convinced that the white saddle is going to look awesome on here. So obviously you're going to want to use some carbon paste in here when you do it for real, and then get to the right torque settings. So I didn't mention it before, but there's a feedback mount here, water bottle mount there, water bottle mount there, and then another water bottle mount here underneath the bottom of the frame. I opted to have them install the decals so you can actually feel that these are raised above the frame. I wasn't sure what the plan was, if I'm going to keep those on there long term or not. I do like the really clean look of not having them there, but I also like having it say Lynskey and the model name on there as well. I'm not sure how durable these will be. So if they start to peel off or get dirty or get gross or whatever, they'll come off, and I will kind of get that clean look by default. Coming around the front of the bike, one of the things that you can opt for is a different color nameplate. Obviously I opted for purple. One of the interesting things is this is not totally flush on the bike. I'm not sure if dirt will get up underneath here. I don't know if you can hear that, but these come off. There's a little hex key, probably a 1 millimeter, maybe 1.5 millimeter. So worst case, I can just kind of pop it off and clean off underneath it. Rotating the work stand a little bit. Well, there's two more stickers. One that says that the frame is built in Tennessee, and the other is another decal with the Lynskey name on it. So that's kind of the walkthrough of the bike. This isn't the lightest frame. I weighed all the stuff, and I don't remember exactly how it is, so how much it weighed. I want to say this was like 400 something odd grams, and this was 2 kilos. I will put the weights up here. Obviously this will be a little bit less after I cut it. This is not the lightest titanium frame, but to get a really light titanium frame, you have to pay for a really light titanium frame. And I was really just wanted to stick my toe into the water here and see if, well, one, how I liked it, if it was worth, you know, maybe getting something more expensive longer term. But I have a feeling that I'm really going to like this bike, and I'm not going to care that it's, you know, 500 grams more than the lightest titanium frame that I could build or that I could buy. So as you can see, the bike is built. Now, every bike has its own set of nuance or challenges. And so we're going to kind of briefly walk through the specific challenges of this bike, this Lynskey GR300 internally rounded frame set. The first thing just to note is that this is not the bike as it will be complete. I have a random carbon seat post in there at the moment because I made a mistake when I ordered the bike or ordered the frame, and I got the 0 offset seat post because based on the GR300's geometry, which is very similar to my Revolt geometry, I expected that I would use a 0 setback seat post, and that turned out not to be the case. I actually need to have a setback on it to get the bike set up the way that I need it to be to ride. So that's something that's interesting, just to know. When I ordered the bike, I told them it was a possibility, and they said no problem, just, you know, order the seat post you think you need, and then if you need to swap it out later, we'll swap it out later. And I'm in the process of swapping that out. I will have to pay return shipping on this. It should be about $13-14, which is totally fine. Before moving on, though, I want to talk about one of the things that's kind of off, though, with this seat post. As you can see here, this is round. And when you put something in a circle, it is very difficult to make it. So if we can focus in on that. So when you put something in a circle, it's very difficult to make it so that it doesn't want to, you know, turn around the circle. So there's some engineering challenges to making this not slip. And I actually took it for a little bit of a ride, in a shakedown ride, as one will do after you build a bike. And the saddle slipped, even though I had it cranked up to the 8 Newton meters that it's supposed to be set to for a carbon saddle. Part of that is because, you know, things want to rotate in here. So it's possible that problem was exacerbated because I need a setback seat post, and this wasn't a setback seat post. But I think that the underlying problem is that it's a round hole, and you have effectively, they have a bearing here, just a very inefficient bearing inside of here. And you can see here that it's actually scored the clamp when it moved. And I think what's going to have to happen in order to make this work properly, I think I'm going to have to stick carbon assembly paste in here to make it not slip. But I really prefer the look of that titanium seat post versus that carbon one. Although, you know, if I can't make this work, then I'll probably just get something that doesn't look so off with the rest of the bike. The other thing about this frame set, as a frame set, is that Lynskey doesn't provide headset spacers in the build or with the frame, which is fine. It's not consistent with other frame sets that I've bought, but it's totally fine. I mean, we're really talking about like $5, $10 worth of parts, so no big deal. It's just something to be aware of. The other thing to be aware of for this frame set is that the rear disc mounting block is 15 millimeters. Most bikes, it's either 20 or 25 millimeters. So the bolts that come with the rear disc caliper probably won't fit. You'll have to order shorter ones, which it's crazy that you spend, you know, $15 on 2 bolts, but that's what it is. Another thing that you're going to want to be aware of if you're going to build this bike is that because you run full outer cables from the shifter through the bike all the way down, either they come out underneath the bottom bracket to the front derailleur or the rear derailleur, you need to have enough outer cable in whatever kit you buy to be able to do that. The only way that I figured out how to do that was with one of these, which is a mountain bike shift cable, the XTR kind. But as you can see here, they don't come with all of the right hardware for a road shifter or gravel shifter setup, because that piece here, which has a little, and it's hard to see here, but there's a little slot. There's a little raised bit. Here we go. This, which differentiates it from some of the other housing ends. If you have road shifters or gravel shifters, that piece ends the outer cable up in here and then it kind of slips into the bottom of the shifter. You don't get that with that kit because it's for mountain bikes. I just happen to have a bunch of these laying around because I've built a lot of bikes, and I don't always replace these because if they're not broken, why not just reuse one that's already there? So if you opt to get the mountain bike shift cable set like I did, because it has one really long 3,300 millimeter outer that you can cut and have a little bit extra to run both the front and rear mechs off of, that will work, but you do need to source this part independently, whether that's you have them laying around or you can find them from your local bike shop. I'm not sure if you can order these separately. So that's just another thing to be aware of. And I don't think that if you buy a road shift kit, that because you get two outers, but neither one of those outers is long enough to actually run full line through the bike to the different mechs. Now, there are some issues with the bike itself, and so let's talk about those now. The most critical of that, and this was going to require that we move the camera, so let's just do that real quick. The thing that we're looking at here is the distance between the crank arm and the chainstay. And as you can see here, I have a cadence sensor right there. Normally, that cadence sensor would be here. But I can't put the cadence sensor here because it impacts the chainstay. More importantly, if you have a power meter, like I have a Pioneer power meter that I was planning to install on this bike, they all have on the left arm a pod right here. Pod on my Pioneer power meter is big enough that it gets stuck. Like I can't even turn past about there. If we measure the gap between the chainstay and the crank, I get, I just moved it. I had 6.4 millimeters, which is not very much space. So even if you found a left-sided power meter with a pod that was 6 millimeters or less of width off the crank, you would have such a small gap between the crank and the pod that if you rode in mud or snow or nasty conditions, which you might do on a gravel bike, you would have such a narrow gap, such a small margin where stuff could build up on the chainstay or on the crank before you start rubbing into that pod and potentially ripping it off or carving a hole into it. So that's something that basically it's going to be really tough to put a left-sided power meter on this bike or run a dual power meter, as I was intending to do, where one side is the left side. So you basically either run pedal power or you get a spider-based power meter. The last thing that I'm going to complain about here, and again, we're going to move the camera here, are these Thru-Axles. What Lynskey did was they basically took away one of the best features about Thru-Axles, is that there's no margin for error. They just work. You spin them in, you get to your reasonable amount of tightness, and you're done. It's consistent. As long as you always do the same amount of tightness, it just always works. And basically, they made these quick release-ish. You have to spin it in, but this, notice I'm rotating this and nothing's happening. Well, on the front, you have to put the arm inside of this little hole here, and hopefully, maybe move that towards the camera, hopefully you can see that. There's a little slot here where this goes in, where this lever goes in, and you have to remember kind of where that slot goes, not tight, mind you. Put that slot in the position that you want it to be, otherwise, you'll screw up your rotor spacing. Then pull the lever out of the slot, spin it around, and then tighten it to how you want it to be. Which, obviously I figured it out, but you shouldn't have to teach somebody how to use the Thru-Axle. You should just spin it in, and that's it. And if you want to do it where you can move this. You do it the DT Swiss style. Even on the giant one where you have to take out a bolt to move the lever is preferable to this, because once you've got that position, as long as you're always on the same wheels, you never have to change that position. Where this is just insane, and these are going to get replaced. I'm going to order some Robert axles to replace this. Making matters worse, the rear through axle doesn't work the same as the front through axle. So it has its own bit of specific knowledge that you need to understand in order to get it to go in and get that consistent amount of torque so that your rotors and calipers and everything line up and your shifting is not messed up. To make this one work, you open it like you would a quick release. If you don't push it in, oh, there it clicked. If you pull it out, this spins around without moving the axle, kind of like the one up front. But when you want to actually move the axle threads, you have to kind of push it until it locks into place, and then it'll spin and either tighten or loosen the axle. So it's just this weird thing, and I don't understand. I mean, if you're going to do this weird like quick release thing, at least make them work the same so that I only have to learn one kind of wonkiness. But the way this is set up, I have to learn two different sets of wonkiness. And if I were to loan somebody this bike, I would have to teach them how to use this through axle. That's just ridiculous. Anyway, it's getting replaced. I'm not going to deal with that. The last thing, and it's also convenient that we are here. I'm not sure if this is a structural element or if it's just there for fenders, because there is a little fender screw down here. But it makes it a little bit tricky to get wheels in, because as you're bringing larger volume wheel into here, up underneath, it makes contact with this bar, this cross bar here. It can be a little bit tricky to get the wheel up inside, underneath the derailleur, into the caliper, without impacting the bike and potentially messing up your rotor by striking it underneath here. Now, that's not an insurmountable problem. That's actually not inconsistent with some other bikes. It's just something to be aware of. The way that you work around this is that you have to put the derailleur all the way down to the lowest, the smallest sprocket back here, and then also drop your chain to the small chain ring so that you have the maximum amount of slack in the system. That's okay. It's easy to do that if you have mechanical shifting, but if you have Di2 shifting, that's a bit of a problem, because at least on road Di2, you can't go past the second to last cog on the rear derailleur if you're in the small ring. So in order to do this, you might have to be in the big ring up front and then move it all the way down. So just to be clear, I'm not saying these things because I think this is a bad frame or a bad bike. Actually, I think it looks awesome. On my shakedown ride, it felt awesome. There's definitely something to this whole titanium bike thing. I'm not saying these things because I think it's bad. I'm saying these things because they're fact. Something that you need to be aware of. One, if you're gonna buy this bike, and two, if you're gonna buy this frame and build this bike, you need to be aware of these things so you can plan for them, so that you don't end up like me, having to run to the local bike shop to buy some spacers, or arranging to get some shorter bolts for the brake caliper, or not being able to run the crank that you want to run because it won't fit. Fortunately, I had another crank that I could just throw in the bike, but that would have been a really expensive mistake if I had bought that crank for this bike. I will be doing a review of the rideability of the frame when I get a chance to. The intent of this is not to provide a review of the frame, how it rides. This is more of a discussion around if you were to buy this bike or if you were to build this bike, what are the things you need to be aware of? So hopefully you found that useful. If you did, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel. For any questions or comments, let me know, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Cheers.